My name's Tom, and I'll be the MC along with Reverend Yo today. So firstly, let's acknowledge country. We acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture, paying our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So we do a countrywide acknowledgement since we're from all over the place. The workshop today, we're so happy and fortunate to have Dr. Glenn Albrecht talk to us about earth emotions. So this is a great learning for me, particularly about how words can make a difference, and in preparing for this workshop, it's really come home to me about just how important it is that we have words to help us navigate as we go through the Anthropocene to somewhere else, much better. So how are we all feeling today? Let's get a bit of interactivity going. Good. Type into the chat box, that would be good. And just let us know what the feeling is. I must admit, I'm feeling some joy. So the 2030 campaign is a spiritual and environmental community of practice. Saying spiritual, that really means the spiritual that you bring with you, whatever that might be. Could be faith-based, could be your values or ethics. Environment, well, of course, there's the natural environment, but there's also our social, political, economic, and internal environment as well. And so being in a community practice really helps us navigate all these things that are happening. So as we're in a community space, let's remember to listen respectfully with acceptance for other people's views and experiences. And while other people are talking, let's give them our full attention and appreciation. Our format today, we'll start with the check-in to get a bit relaxed and relieve some tension, led by Venerable Misoyou Shih. She's our mentor and guide from Nan Tien Temple and enthusiastic participant in the campaign as well. Then we have a talk by Glenn about the earth emotions, and following that we'll have breakout room discussions, back to a plenary after that, closing, and after 3 o'clock, you're welcome to stay back for just a chat. So if you'd like to connect a bit more to our spiritual and environmental community, stay in touch on Facebook. I'll paste a couple of links into the Zoom chat. So that's for our Facebook group and for the newsletter subscription. And so let me hand over to Reverend Yo, and we'll do the check-in.
Thank you, Tom. Well, I hope everybody is feeling relaxed. And if you're not, maybe we'll just spend a few minutes just to check back in within ourselves, get back into our skin, and relax. Here we go. So maybe you're familiar with the routine. So I'll get everyone to sit up nice and straight and look straight ahead of you. So your head is not too high up or not too low. So just looking straight ahead of you, and you might close your eyes. Deep breath in, deep breath out, and just thinking, relax. Breathe in, breathe out a couple more times. So wherever you are, whatever you've been doing, It was the last moment. It was the past. So let's put our attention right here and now, sitting in front of your tablet or computer or your phone, just relaxing, just letting go, and just pay attention to your breathing. Breathe in, breathe out.
Recording in progress.
Relax more and more. Just take your time. Relax, one moment at a time. If I may ask the other participants to turn off their voice, the mute, please, thank you. Breathe in and out. Paying attention inside ourselves, just relaxing, getting ourselves prepared and ready to listen and to try and understand more wisdom, to get insight into ourselves as well. What our feelings are, what our thoughts will be, or we could be enlightened by Glenn. So for now, just relax. So slowly bring yourself back. Bring your awareness back to the here and now. When you open your eyes, we're getting ready to reconnect, getting ready and preparing ourselves to listen and to connect with one another. So I'm asking you to breathe in, breathe out, letting go, relaxing, coming back. Breathe in again, returning to the here and now. Breathe in again, getting ready to open your eyes and looking at the screen in front of you. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll introduce Dr. Glenn Albrecht, Earth Emotions. This is a very short bio. So who's Professor Glenn Albrecht? He's an honorary associate in the School of Geosciences at the University of Sydney, New South Wales. He retired as Professor of Sustainability at Murdoch University in mid-2014. He continues to work as an environmental philosopher and published a book, Earth Emotions. He currently lives at Wallaby Farm on Wonnarua land in New South Wales. He describes himself as a farmosopher, combining thinking and writing and growing food and protecting a haven of wildlife. While he is best known for creating the concept of solastalgia, is it? Or the lived experience of negative environmental change. His most recent work develops the main of the symbiocene, a future state where humans reintegrate with the rest of nature. So we're very excited and we're looking forward to Dr. Glenn, Earth Emotions. We'll welcome Dr. Glenn.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be welcomed by you, and I very much appreciate the efforts that you and Tom and Ling have made to connect me with the group. And I hope that in the 20 minutes or so that I speak, and that time after, when we have the opportunity for questions, that I will be able to interact with more of you, and hopefully the session will become more coherent and valuable for you. The only other things that I could say about my background is that I was born in Perth in 1953, so I'm now 68 years old. My father was an immigrant from Sri Lanka, and my mother was a pioneer family in the southwest of Western Australia. So I was born into Noongar country in and around Perth, and I was lucky to have grandparents that lived in the deep southwest of Western Australia in the tall tree country, where the famous karri and jarrah trees were once found in abundance. And so in my book, Earth Emotions, I write about what I call my symbiography, which is the total or the sum total of the influences on my life that drew me to environmental thinking and to start writing about our emotional connections to the earth, both positive and negative, good and bad. And it really stems from a childhood that was deeply immersed in the birds, the flora and fauna of the southwest of Western Australia. And I was very lucky with my grandmother, who was a wildlife carer, a bird lover, and a very astute person with respect to nature, and not just in Western Australia. She actually had a knowledge of wildlife all over the world. My grandfather on my mother's side was also a bushman. He knew how to live very comfortably in this really dense, wet forests in the southwest of Western Australia. And he was a forester and could mill logs, build houses, do all sorts of very practical things. So he was an amazing grandfather. And then later, as I matured, my mother became a really gifted amateur botanist, and she was able to teach me the secrets of the amazing plants of Western Australia, particularly the orchids and others that have their secret lives and secret interconnections with fungi of particular types that they have this almost personal relationship with. So it's no surprise that I should grow up to be a nature boy, and I very much was interested in becoming an ornithologist as I got older and went through high school. But various events in my life meant that I actually took a U-turn at one stage and became not less interested in birds and the idea of ornithology and zoology, but interested in the big issues in life that philosophy, religions, psychology, psychiatry were involved in. And also being of the right age, the late 60s and early 70s were a pretty exciting time to be involved in the counterculture and involved in the early attempts to stop things like the nuclear tests in the South Pacific, the wood chipping of the forests of Western Australia, and of course, issues like the Vietnam War. And I realized as a very young man that there was more to life than birds. And so I became very much committed to an idea of life that involved thinking as well as activism and trying to understand these complex issues that humans deal with. So my biography, my symbiography or eco-biography, was not typical of a Western Australian growing up in suburban Perth. And so I would suggest that influence on my life from my grandparents and my mother has just reverberated through my whole adult life. So much so that I now understand that my commitment to the environment and our human commitment to preserving, conserving, and loving and valuing the environment within which we live is the direct result from that set of influences on my early life. I went to university at the University of Western Australia to become an ornithologist, but failed dismally right at the end of first year, where I decided that the life of philosophy was what I really needed to do. And I started a series of subjects in sociology and philosophy and completed the equivalent of a degree in philosophy at that time. I then subsequently went on to do the equivalent of honours and then began a PhD in philosophy. And that PhD was on the idea of organic unity and the unity between humans and the rest of life, particularly within a social and political context. But again, unfortunately, my supervisor, Professor Julius Cavesi, had a heart attack and had to retire from academic life. And in order to continue my thesis, I had to find a new supervisor somewhere in Western Australia, and that failed because I was working on a very obscure topic. But in the end, it was someone, a professor in the University of Newcastle in New South Wales, that was able to help me complete my thesis. And so with my wife Jill and my stepdaughter Sarah and two large dogs, we packed up and moved from Perth and went to New South Wales. And that's where I still am. And it's that movement from Western Australia to New South Wales that triggered many of the feelings that I now express in my writings as earth emotions. And in particular, I'd have to say that the most important thing I discovered was that New South Wales was not only a beautiful place to live and rich in bird life, but that one of the famous ornithologists of of the world, John Gould, had visited New South Wales in 1839-40. And indeed, his wife, Elizabeth Gould, had a brother who was living in the Upper Hunter. And so my wife and I wrote a brief story or an account of their visit to New South Wales in that time and the birds that they saw and their experiences. And I thought in order to do that job properly, I had to go to the Upper Hunter, which is about 2 hours inland from the city of Newcastle, and visit the very place where they stayed, a place called Yarundai, which means place of possums in the Wonnarua language. And so we went there, but in order to get there, you have to go through the coal mining areas of the Upper Hunter of New South Wales. And there you'll find hundreds of square kilometres of open pit or open cut coal mines. And the Goulds had written enthusiastically and beautifully about the beauty of the Hunter and its glorious undulating landscape that it was described at the time in the 1840s as the Tuscany of the South. So you can imagine I was full of these wonderful ideas of this beautiful landscape, full of birds and marsupials like kangaroos. When I actually get there and discovered the place was like a moonscape, it was a real blow to my psyche. It was a severe assault on my preconceived ideas of what this place was like. And it began a process of thought, which continues to the present day about, well, I had this emotional reaction to the desolation of a place that I had in my imagination seen as beautiful and as bountiful, as a place where humans, both the Wonnarua prior to settlement or colonization by the Europeans, and the Europeans themselves, a place that humans could find particularly attractive. And it was that experience of the destruction of this landscape that drove me to create the concept of solastalgia, which I did in the year 2003. And it was the direct result of experiencing a desolated landscape. And this idea of solastalgia, for those of you that haven't come across it before, is the lived experience of negative environmental change. I sometimes describe it as the bumper sticker version is the homesickness you have when you're still at home. So I realized as a young academic that at that time, that there wasn't a word in the English language to describe this desolation of place, this loss of one sense of place that was occurring in the Upper Hunter. It was also something that was occurring to different people in different places. The mining was covering over 500 square kilometres of the territory of the Upper Hunter region. And that these people were experiencing this distress about the destruction of their home environment in isolation. And I thought that if I could create a term that they could share in the English language, that would also perhaps help them overcome the feeling it was their problem, or that somehow it was their psychological problem that needed fixing, not open cut coal mining by the state government and multinational mining corporations. And so solastalgia came from this feeling that we needed in the English language a term to describe this sense of desolation, this distress that comes directly from your relationship to your home environment. And it amazed me that we didn't have such a word. And it was perhaps an expression of the fact that we had become as a culture so alienated and isolated from our support environment that we felt that we didn't need a language to describe what our relationship to it was like. We just took it for granted, unless, as was occurring to the people of the Upper Hunter, the home environment was literally being taken away from them, bucket load by bucket load. As the coal was being extracted, there were massive voids being created, these kilometres long open cuts, half a kilometre wide, sometimes up to half a kilometre deep. These were massive impacts on the environment. And it went together with dust and noise. 2 large coal-fired power stations were in that region as well. So you get the fallout or pollution from burning the coal. Massive truck movements, railway movements, the infrastructure needed to export coal to the rest of the world was all there. And not only that, when I first started studying this region, they were also experiencing a really horrendous drought. And I realized that as climate change was beginning to affect the whole of the world, but Eastern Australia in particular, this part of the world was suffering not only from the extraction of coal, but also the burning of coal worldwide, and that the severity and extent of the drought was in fact directly related to the fact that the coal that was being extracted was being burnt all over the world and then was being re-imported in a sense as climate change. And so the loss of the ecosystem health of the Upper Hunter was the focus of my research. And because I'm a philosopher, I was particularly focused on the mental aspects of this loss. I left it to doctors to look at asthma and other issues associated with the pollution that people were experiencing. But again, I found it interesting that in psychiatry and psychology, there was very little written about what was going on in the psyche when your home environment is being desolated. And so this loss of ecosystem health was being reflected in the loss of human psychic health. And at that time, I was able to find some support in the literature to build a case for this new term, solastalgia. And so now, almost 20 years later, that term is being widely used by people the world over. And I guess it's a reflection of the fact that we haven't made a lot of progress reversing the negative impacts of our culture and our technology and our industry on the environment, that the word is in fact still relevant. I wrote an essay in 2012, which was published in The Conversation, called The Age of Solastalgia. And I'm afraid I think we're still in it. We've yet to move. However, we're seeing now, almost in a panic mode, people becoming acutely aware of the destruction of our home environment on large scale, the fires in Eastern Australia. We'd have to be blind not to see what's happening in other parts of the world where heat waves and the impacts of heat waves on people are beginning to become obvious, not a hidden aspect of climate change. However, what I decided to do very early on in my work was not to dwell for too long in the depths of solastalgia, because there were plenty of other people worldwide also, looking at the potential doomsday scenarios, the apocalyptic visions of a future that climate change could give us. My commitment, I think, to myself and my own children, my step-grandchildren, my granddaughter, and indeed all children of the earth, was that I've got to fight this desolation. And the way that I could do this as a philosopher and as a thinker was to think my way out of the solastalgia and to begin to provide a more challenging, optimistic future that people could begin to think about. I was not content with just giving up on the future as just going to be negative and one that I don't know, the Dark Mountain Project, the deep adaptation people. There are plenty of feature writers for the major newspapers of the world that write really excellent articles about what's going wrong in the end of the world. So I decided to go in the other direction, and my most recent effort in that regard is the concept of the symbiocene. And most of you hopefully are aware that there isn't an effort to try and describe the current era as the Anthropocene, or the age of human dominance. Tom mentioned very early when this Zoom meeting started that welcome to a beautiful day in the Holocene. Well, the Holocene may have ended on the 5th of the 3rd, 1953, which is my birthday, because it seems that for the whole of my lifetime, we've experienced the massive degradation of the environment worldwide. And so I'm a child of the Anthropocene, and I'm gradually seeing what remains of the Holocene disappearing as a memory even. And so I write extensively about that sense of human dominance leading to a future which is highly undesirable. There'll be no good Anthropocene. The Symbiocene, I argue, on the basis of science and also many other dimensions or pathways in my thinking, is centrally based on the concept of the unity of life as expressed through the concept of symbiosis. And this is something that I think has a lot in common with Buddhism and other religious perspectives that really try and emphasize the unity in life, its interdependence, rather than focusing on the ego and what, some people call it the delusion of the self that seems to be culturally dominant in many parts of the world and in many contemporary cultural contexts. So this idea that we're an enduring, isolated ego is something that I think the Symbiocene as a concept begins to critique, and in its place begins to suggest that we are a symbiotically interrelated organism, beautifully illustrated by the concept of the microbiome, and the fact that we're actually not a single organism. We're what the famous biologist Lynn Margulis called a holobiont, or multiple organisms existing in the same time and in the same place. I read yesterday that they've discovered 57 new types of viruses that exist only in human poo. Yes, you heard it correctly, human poo. However, in our gut microbiome, there are literally trillions of organisms, viruses, bacteria, and fungi that constitute the living being that we think of ourselves. So we need a very important check on the idea that we're somehow isolated atoms or egos, and that this idea within science, supported certainly by Buddhism and other religious traditions, is suggesting a future for us which acknowledges our interconnectedness with others, our communication with others, and this idea of the symbiocene as a place where we can begin to bring all those things together. Again, because I'm a philosopher, I thought about, well, what's happening to our positive earth emotions as the Anthropocene destroys everything? It obviously destroys our ability to enjoy, to have positive emotional connections to our home environment, not only locally, but also internationally or globally. And so I began to think about the spiritual dimensions, the emotional dimensions of a new way of looking at our relationship to the earth. And of course, I have no particular mortgage on that topic. It's been covered by thousands of intellectuals, academics, and is central to religious traditions the worldwide. My particular take on this was to think about the idea of a secular spirituality, that it's something that I feel when I live on Wallaby Farm. When I walk across the earth here, I feel as if I'm connected spiritually to the life, not only on top of the ground, and there are wallabies everywhere, but also the invisible life below me, the fungi, the mycelium, the trillions of organisms that constitute the soil within which I grow vegetables and fruit. And that's a profoundly moving experience for me, but not one captured for me personally by any of the past religions of the world. And so I created my own spiritual concept, which I call the Geist. And the word Ged comes from an ancient Indo-European root word, Ged, which means to unite. And it's the root word for words in English and other languages, but in English, good, to gather, to bring together. All of those words, the good sound that comes from this word Ged. So I love the idea that there was this ancient root word that we could bring back into life and give it a connection to the idea of spirituality. And so I created the Geist, where the Geist word in German means a spirit or life force. And so a united spirit or life force, which comes from our biophysical world, our relationship to life, was something that I thought might be useful. And so there are political, ethical, and spiritual elements to my thinking that hopefully come together in this concept of the symbiocene. And as a result, my book, Earth Emotions, hopefully represents a synthesis of coming together of a variety of ways of thinking: science, ethics, religion, sociology, psychology, and many more. I consider myself to be a transdisciplinary thinker. There is no one discipline that imprisons my thinking, much to the dismay of editors of books and university vice chancellors. They just didn't like what I was doing because it didn't have a number attached to it. If you applied for a grant, who did you send it to get it reviewed? All those kinds of practical issues. So as a pharmosopher, I now have a good deal of freedom. I can combine gardening with philosophy whenever I like, and I can write whatever I like. And so I'm now writing about the response that we can have to the destruction and the potential of this, the Anthropocene to bring us down, and write a much more optimistic story about what I call generation symbiocene, the next generation of humans. And it's not particularly tied to the young. It can also include baby boomers like me and plenty of other generations in between. But I see the young as having a really important role in this movement from the dominance of the Anthropocene to the emergence of the symbiocene. And so what I'm doing now is developing ideas, and they were probably pioneered by many other thinkers, but including people like E.F. Schumacher, who wrote the wonderful book called Small is Beautiful, the attempt to establish Buddhist economics. Because part of my critique of the Anthropocene is its gigantism. And so the small is beautiful, the small is regional, the small is local, are all themes that have been covered by some fantastic thinkers in the past. So the idea of simplicity and non-violence is also part of Schumacher's effort to bring Buddhist thinking back into contemporary economics. And without realizing, as I was reconstructing my idea of the future through the concept of the symbiocene, it bears a remarkable resemblance to many of the key concepts that were pioneered by Schumacher. And so I'm now in the position where I'm the champion of generation symbiocene. Greta Thunberg, the school, the climate change children that are striking to prevent climate change are my friends and companions in what's left of my journey in life. The idea of a non-violent revolution is certainly an integral part of what I see as the role of generation symbiocene. I'm getting on a bit, so I'm getting impatient. So at times I acknowledge that it's frustrating trying to present an optimistic picture of our future. But again, because I think the young in particular need not only a powerful critique of the past and the present, they need a vision of a future which gives them something to move towards, something to give them the creative energy needed to not only critique, but also create. And so that's part of why I'm still creating new words or neologisms. The philosopher Wittgenstein described famously that the limits of my world are the limits of my language, or the limits of my language are the limits of my world is the correct order. So I'm now expanding our language so that we can expand the world of the symbiocene to try and create terms for positive earth emotions, some of which you may have come across as well. I talk about euteria, or a good earth feeling. I talk about endemophilia, which is the love of the locally endemic. I talk about solophilia, which is the love of working with other people to bring about substantial political change. So all these terms I'm trying to incorporate into a vision of the future that I invite other people to join. So if you feel any kind of empathy for the project that I'm involved with, you're already in the symbiocene, which is fantastic because entry is free. There's no end to the amount of work that needs to be done. It involves all generations. It involves all genders. It's not, I can see elements of the symbiocene strongly advocated by the current Pope. It's present in other religious orders and religious movements. So it's not something which is excluding. It's something which is, I hope, deeply inclusive of people that are already on a path that intersects with that of my vision of the symbiocene. So it's a giant Venn diagram of which hopefully all of you can see a significant part. So this idea of a revolution based on symbiosis connects, in my view, the science of life, the bioscience of life, with a spiritual perspective on what life is about. The old view of science was competitive. The Darwinian selfish gene view has prevailed up until now. But I believe that we now have not only a spiritual element on our side, we also have science on our side, and it's science with a capital S. So I hold dearly and strongly to this vision of an optimistic future. I see the alternative as unthinkable. Particularly as a grandfather, I can't imagine just saying, well, there's nothing we can do any longer. Let's just give up and adapt to the heating world, the rising sea levels. I'm going to fight it until my last breath. And the fight is within me. As I said, it's non-violent and peaceful. But I also recognize, and particularly if you read my book, I acknowledge, hopefully in a realistic manner, that humans aren't perfect. There are many aspects of our nature which are severely constraining the free opening up of the symbiocene as a new era. And I acknowledge that in all cultures, not just the one that we're in now, the advanced industrial, technologically dominant Western culture. So I'll leave it at that as an overview of my thinking, and hopefully from this spot in it's called Duns Creek in New South Wales. It's on the border of the Yimang and the Yimang River, where the Wanneroo people once trod. And again, I pay my respects to them because they were here for tens of thousands of years. I've only been here for 7. So I think they've got in terms of philosophy and ethics and the practical view of life, they beat me hands down. I'm trying to catch up. So I'm hoping that you can ask questions, and I'll let Tom do all the guiding of how we go next. Tom has to turn himself back on.
There we go.
There he is.
Well, you saw the wow, and here's the wow again.
Thanks, Tom.
That was such a great overview and introduction to the whole topic. Of course, it's rather extensive. And let me just, where's the book gone? Oh, here's the book. There's the book.
I recognize that book.
You recognize that, yes. So I've been dipping into that occasionally. So it's sometimes seemingly simple things like the word for eco-paralysis. I've kind of been searching for that. You'd think it'd jump out at you, but there you go. It's like diving into the book and discussing it sort of just gives us clear things to be able to communicate. And I really resonated with your ending there, Glenn, about getting on with things. That seems to come into the term of solastalgia, and that's something that we certainly like to talk about. Is that in our spiritual lives, faith can be such an important thing. And so for me, it's like whatever the doubts, concerns, impossibilities, is to proceed with faith and just get on with it.
So I like to dedicate the merits to the session to all sentient beings. So may kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity pervade all worlds. May we cherish and build affinities to benefit all beings. May chant, pure land, and precepts inspire equality and patience. May our humility and gratitude give rise to great vows.